Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and on episode 109, I will be reviewing the much-anticipated The Wild Robot, the latest animated film from DreamWorks, and I will be covering a brief review of Super / The Man, the Christopher Reeve Story. The Wild Robot will have a non-spoiler and spoiler section, where, given the fact that it's a documentary, Super / The Man will have just a general review. There may be spoilers, but given the fact that it's based on somebody's real life and is a documentary, as I've said, it will probably have some spoilers in it, so no need to worry about that. Timecodes will be listed in the description, so if you'd like to hop around the episode, you're more than welcome to. Now let's jump into non-spoiler review of The Wild Robot.
This Gosling is yours.
Negative. That Gosling stalks me, emits noise, and makes simple tasks more complicated or impossible.
Yeah, they do that. Goslings imprint on the first thing they see. Which would be you.
The Wild Robot was directed by Chris Saunders, whose notable credits include Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. I had an interesting perspective going into this film, which was that I'd seen the trailers, I was unfamiliar with the book series, so for the first time in a long time, I was just, and I'd like to say that most people are like this, but I didn't really have any expectation because as being unfamiliar with the source material, I'd seen what the trailers had to offer, which was a cute look at a robot learning to feel. At least that was my assumption. And I have to say that I was absolutely floored by this movie. I didn't expect it to be what it wound up being, and I can get into that by the end of the review, which is all of the performances in this film are perfect. Lupita Nyong'o, Pedro Pascal, Kit Connor, Bill Nighy, Stephanie Hsu, Mark Hamill, Catherine O'Hara, Matt Berry, and Ving Rhames. I want to congratulate everybody behind this film because when I walked out of this, and if you had told me this prior to seeing it, I would have laughed at you, but The Wild Robot, as of now, is my top picture of the year. It's the best movie I have seen this year. The Wild Robot not only delivers an incredible story that has so many different levels that, depending on your age range, how you are going to be affected by this emotionally, its application and reach in terms of how it is going to be able to affect you emotionally is jaw-dropping. On top of that, the direction, the cinematography, the use of the digital effects in 3D, creating this painterly effect that we had seen in something like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, but it continues that given the fact that the film takes place on a remote island on Earth. We are given a setting that really plays all 4 seasons throughout its runtime, allowing for a wide variety of visuals, as well as a dynamic film that it's clear as somebody, Chris Saunders, who's been working in animation for such a long time, knows how to handle the camera. And it's funny, coming off of Transformers 1, which I didn't review super positively, this film does exactly what you would hope you get from an animated film, which is if you have a script as good as something that could have been made in live action, but because of the art form, and animation is an art form, there's a reason it has its own category in the Academy Awards. A lot of the times I would argue it should have won Best Pictures. It's only happened 3 times for nominations. And that the way the camera moves through the 3D space was jaw-dropping. We are able to follow characters in a way that is not feasible with live action, or you would be having to replace them with digital doubles. And I knew I was going to do this coming into this, which is this film ultimately is about a blended family, given the fact that the robot, and this is in the trailers, is obviously a robot, and the goose or gosling is a bird. It has those elements of a blended family, particularly with the fact that the robot is learning to be a mom, and how that relationship develops throughout the film it was awe-inspiring. And I would be remiss, here's a little short story. After leaving the film, the first thing I wanted to do was call my mom, which is to say that I have an amazing mom, Debbie, who raised me, and this is probably not new information, but it's worth stating to begin with, which is that I have ADHD, and its attention deficit hyperactive disorder has had a lot of different labels, particularly through growing up in the 1990s, where it wasn't really accustomed to, or education wasn't attuned to somebody with that learning disability, that I really wouldn't be where I am without the help of my parents and my mom in particular, who read every single book that she could to learn the best way to help me to become successful, not just economically or as a working professional, but as a person to begin with. So I really wanted to credit my mom because I am who I am because of her dedication and love and support for me. And that is to say, this movie manages to capture that perfectly. Anybody who has had a single parent, or one specifically who did more of the parenting, that can happen a lot of the time if you have one parent potentially working in shift work and one being around more than the other, or potentially only having one, or also that step relationship, which is also is relevant in this. I'm absolutely shocked in how that this film is able to capture the emotional core of what makes those relationships so vitally important, and also the touchstone of the it's not a misnomer, but the statement that when raising a child, it takes a village. And the way that these relationships evolve, particularly around Roz in this movie, and how dynamics can change in your perspective, the more information that you're willing to accept or be given can dramatically affect how your point of view towards specific things. And the more you learn about something, the more open you are and accepting of it. I've said, and I did say this in Transformers 1, which is that the way children's movies are made is represented by the way that they are seen in the theaters. And I'm happy to report that I saw this on Thursday afternoon, and the audience from start to finish was absolutely silent. Outside of the fact of an emotional response, which the film is trying to get, all of the moments of humor worked out really, really well. They're quite smart and eloquent with how the jokes are used, and they come out of those characters' relationships, as opposed to, oh, we need a joke here, zing. The humor happens naturally and organically, allowing for all of the relationships to feel your investment in, to be much more rewarding when characters achieve or surpass challenges that they could be facing in their way. I absolutely adored this movie. It's going to be a really interesting Academy Awards Best Animated Picture run. I loved Inside Out, and if you had told me that, I've said that a lot in this episode, but it's true, The Wild Robot would surpass that. And hyperbole is something that is used so often in film reception and critical analysis, because to get the most insight or to get the most clicks and reactions and views is to say that something is the best or the worst. It's a segment of the vastly more successful podcast, The Weekly Planet. And I've talked about how Marvel films get reacted to in this way, where we say it's the best Marvel movie ever, it's the worst Marvel movie ever, and what's going to drum up that reaction from people. And DreamWorks is a studio that has had some of the greatest animated films of all time. I absolutely adore the Kung Fu Panda trilogy. I did review 4, and if you listen to that episode, you'll know I didn't love it nearly as much as that trilogy. How to Train Your Dragon is a phenomenal film. Shrek's, I loved and adored. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And this new franchise that they have created has all the touchstones of what you would expect from an S-tier studio. The best that DreamWorks is able and capable of, the best that Pixar is able and capable of. And I'm so happy that in a post-Spider-Verse world, we are allowed to make special and unique films. A lot of the story elements of the story, somebody, if they really wanted to be critical, and I would argue nitpicky, could say, well, these have been developed and presented to an audience before. My pushback to that would be that the way that these are wrapped up in this story and presented prove that it has an understanding of why those relationships and that story are so important. And there has not been a film that has touched these elements as well, and I'm going to say The Wild Robot does this better than as something like Iron Giant, which was never really given the chance to be successful theatrically, where The Wild Robot has. DreamWorks knows the movie that they have. This did premiere at TIFF, and I'm really hoping that this sees a lot of audiences coming in. I'm not necessarily sure what the box office is for the film yet. I haven't looked it up. I'm going to be totally honest. I'm a little nervous as to what the what the audience reception is going to be like in terms of people going to see it over opening weekend. But I would be shocked if word of mouth does not convince or predicate this becoming a massive success, because DreamWorks has in their hands, in my opinion, one of the best animated films I've ever seen. And I don't say that lightly. If you're a longtime listener of the podcast or you're new to this, hi. I absolutely adore animated films, and I don't think a lot of the times they get the credit that they do deserve. But the quality of every single aspect of this film, from the top down, proves that they had an understanding of the seriousness and universal appeal of this story. And Chris Saunders, who also handled the screenplay, developed and created a vast array of unique characters that I really enjoyed seeing, and their development around what was going on with Bright Bill and Roz. Their elements are hilarious, and I like Pedro Pascal's Fink as almost like the fun, wisecracking uncle who kind of has a little bit of a dark edge to him, but at the same time, he still loves and cares for his little blended or chosen family that he does have. And everybody else around them, the metaphors and the symbolism behind what it means to be a parent, specifically a mother in this case, are universal. And I was moved. There were multiple times in this where I teared up, if not cried. It's probably about two crying for sure, and then a third tear up. Because even though some of these elements could be predicted, the journey that you go on with our main characters is a roller coaster from start to finish. And the highs and lows of parenting, me being a parent myself, obviously I'm going to be connecting substantially with Roz. But having been a child, and as I said, the relationship that you have with your parent, good or bad, you're going to see a lot of those elements presented in this film. And I just want to say thank you, because it's been a hard time with kids' films where you don't really feel the respect being given towards them. There's been a number of films lately that just feel like cash grabs, and obviously movies are meant to make money, but it is especially rewarding to see the people behind the scenes understanding the significance of their art form, specifically because this is going to be targeted towards children. It is a familiar book. It's one that's my school, I know, has read, and they are eagerly anticipating seeing the film. And I would recommend this to absolutely everybody. I called my mom, as I said, after I saw the film, and I told my mom and my sister, you have to see this movie. I know it's going to be emotionally relevant for them, and the universal appeal of this story is going to work for a lot of people. And I'm really hoping that this film is a success. I'm not sure yet. I'll probably look up the box office numbers afterwards, but I was floored by this movie, and I can kind of get into more why in the spoilers for this with the what happened, but there are multiple levels to this story as opposed to the simple one that the film marketed, which I'm kind of glad they did in a way, where if you knew you had something special, you tease people, you bring them in, and then you blow their minds with the significance to which you have created in front of you. So I commend everybody behind this film. It's a really special movie. I haven't taken my kids yet. I'm actually going to be taking them the week you hear this posted. And I'm really excited to see what they take from it. It's the first time in a long time where I've seen a children's film before them. And it's the first time in a long time that I'm really looking forward to seeing another movie again. So that will do it for non-spoilers. I adored this movie from start to finish. It's an emotional film, and the journey these characters go on is rewarding from start to finish. I think I've said that already, but it is true. And I can explain more so in spoilers. So let's jump into spoilers for The Wild Robot.
So what are you going to name him?
I assign to you, Gosling, 0001.
Okay, that sucked.
That sucks. Whoa.
You gotta learn to make stuff up. Come on, find that, woo inside you.
All right, we are in full spoilers for The Wild Robot, and it's time to find out.
What happened?
Roz is one of the Universal Dynamics Rosm robots, and there was some sort of shipwreck, and she winds up on this island looking for a task. That's what these Rosm Universal Dynamic robots are supposed to be for. They can complete any task if given it, and as Roz, who's not named Roz yet, she eventually names herself that, is traveling throughout the island. She cannot communicate with any of the animals because she doesn't speak animal. And we see a bunch of hijinks in the way of a misunderstanding of culture, how the society works, preys and predators and whatnot, and eventually takes the time to build the universal language of the animals, which is something I found really fun because, for one, the animals, in order to for them to communicate, there has to be some sort of language. And this is not a new thing. We've seen in Brother Bear, other animal films where, of course, there has to be a language, Lion King being another example, where there's some sort of universal language. It is not species specific. Roz eventually is able to communicate, but still doesn't have a place in this world. She is unable to find a task. It's not something that the creatures around her really seem to understand until eventually Roz winds up in the bear cave, who's voiced by Mark Hamill, which I was completely unaware of, so credit to Mark Hamill. He wasn't as recognizable as he is with some of his other roles, something like Skeletor, which was more recent. And through an incredible chase sequence where the bear is chasing the robot, or Roz winds up killing a family of geese. One egg being left over, the runt of the family, Bright Bill, who's named Bright Bill later, and Roz eventually is given a task by Catherine O'Hara's possum character, Pinktail, and then in this instance, Roz's programming actually kicks in where I've been given a task, what do I need to accomplish? And it's 3 goals. She has to shelter and feed the animal, she has to teach the animal to swim, and she has to teach the animal in order to fly so that way it can leave for the winter. A simple 3-task structure or 3-step structure that a robot is able to understand. And this is the first level of the storytelling that on its own would probably have been enough, which is Roz is constantly changing her protocols or programming in order to be a mother, learning from the other animals, Pinktail, who is a possum and has a multitude of kids who all fake deaths in different ways. Something we are all familiar with, which is possums faking their own deaths and the kids finding really fun and unique ways to have themselves die, and Pinktail telling them they don't need a motivation, they just need to die. And that's really funny. And again, it's an added level of depth this film has, which is presenting the different perspectives on motherhood, what it means to be a mom. Is it the simple tasks? Are you done being a parent when you feel that your child has moved on to adulthood? No, not really, because you're still a parent. You will always be a parent for as long as your kids are alive or dead. You still had that job and responsibility. And this film continually tackles those ideas as Bright Bill continually grows up and matures, eventually achieving all of the tasks that Roz had set for Bright Bill. But again, Roz being a robot, learning what it means to love and be alive is one of the elements of the story that is stretched throughout the entire thing. Knowing what does that mean? Think Pedro Pascal's character is especially interesting because he doesn't actually know what it means to love. What is that feeling? How to express it? How do you know when you are feeling it? Even coming from a warm-blooded animal, he's unable to explain it to Roz, which their dynamic is so special and interesting because of the fact that they are a chosen blended family. Think choosing to be with Roz just because of it being convenient for him, Roz being this nearly unstoppable robot that can shelter and feed him, keep him warm. Obviously, there are a lot of pros to Fink, but his hard exterior and the shield he has put around himself starts to wear away as the truly chosen family dynamic continues throughout the movie. And another element that I was certainly not expecting, even though I had seen the marketing for this film, which is because Roz is a robot, how she teaches Bright Bill to do anything and what Bright Bill has learned from just observing his mother is being alive and social interactions are robotic. I would argue that this film's subtext is Bright Bill being on the autistic spectrum because his social tools that he has in order to communicate with other animals is that of a robot, which is it is not of the normal way of communicating, even moving. He makes like beep boop beep boop or like mechanical sounds as he is moving around. And the way that Roz is trying to teach him to swim is that of a human being, not having a database on how each and every animal learns to accomplish these tasks. And this relationship evolves in such an interesting way because Bright Bill, thinking he fits in and he's normal, but as soon as he is tested by actually meeting up with other groups of geese, comes to learn that no, he is different. And does his differences make him worse and less than? And of course they don't. Your uniqueness is what makes each and every individual special. Another added element to this story, where each of these stories on their own could have been equally as interesting, but because the film is able to weave them so perfectly into this beautiful mosaic, it adds to what makes this film so special. As Bright Bill is growing up and starting to become one with the other geese, the third task is learning to fly. And Bright Bill, being the runt, doesn't have the wingspan of the other birds. And the problem solving in this is so fun, which Roz goes to a hawk. I believe it's a hawk. What is this? No, it's a peregrine falcon. Fun fact, the fastest dive bombing bird, and voiced by Ving Rhames. And his character, Thunderbolt, is able to show Bright Bill that no, your size isn't a problem. It's actually a benefit. Because of the size of you, you're able to dive at quicker speeds. Your maneuverability is much more manageable because you don't have to worry about longer outstretched wings, and learns how to fly, thus accomplishing the last task that Roz had set out for Bright Bill. Bright Bill even having his own Rocky montage, which was something I absolutely loved, in how they are able to build up his strength. As to be a goose and to migrate, you need to fly for very long periods of time. And Roz learns this information from Bill Nighy's character, Longneck. That has to be a reference to The Land Before Time, but if it's not, it doesn't actually matter. And he has seen how special Roz is in that relationship and brings him into his group of geese, and they eventually migrate. This, again, would be enough to be a special story, but we see Roz having that empty nester, syndrome is not the right word, but feeling where I've done everything I can for my child and they're moving on without me. And because of their relationship, Bright Bill, obviously hurt by the fact that Roz is raising him because she is responsible for the deaths of his family, keeps them separate, and neither of them is able to say that they love each other. Roz, being a robot, is not really sure what these feelings are. What is happening to me? Bright Bill feeling that he has to keep Roz away from him and keep her at a distance because of their obviously historied past, is added levels and depth you don't need, but the film has them. And this would have been enough for me for the story, where we see him move on. She's accomplished her goals, but that's not it. That's not the end of being a parent. And the added side of Roz not being sure if she leaves the island, it's something in the beginning where she tries to send out a signal, hey, come get me, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, but holds off on doing that until she's accomplished this task of parenting, eventually leading to the company Universal Dynamics coming back to collect Roz. And she's especially interesting because she's been able to overwrite her programming, learning to love and parent, communicate with animals. She's really special, and it's something that they would love to study. And I love this aspect of the film, which is she has now become one of the other animals. She has saved everybody with the help of Fink during a really rough winter, and they have all lived together and lived harmoniously, appreciating everybody's differences and creating this real community that fights off against Universal Dynamics and keeping Roz safe. But Roz coming to the realization that they're going to keep coming from me, I need to go back. And you finally have this conversation between Roz and Bright Bill about what makes Roz Roz. It has nothing to do with the programming. It's about who she is. She has reached free will, overcoming the programming that she had been given, and that's not what makes her her. And we get a beautiful ending, which is during a later migration. Eventually, we see Bright Bill and the geese community going to the Universal Dynamics farm or city, or rather, and Roz, even though she's been cleaned, polished, she still identifies as Roz, which is a really special ending to this film. I've been told it's a trilogy, but I'm really curious on what the other two stories are. I do hope that they are equally as interesting as the first film. And I think I've explained as to why it's so special. There are so many different stories and elements that they've put into this, and the relationships are so heartwarming, and the investment in time and respect given to each and all of the characters. The beaver being somebody voiced by Matt Berry, I believe is who it is, cutting down the biggest tree, and it finally coming to an end where all the animals bond together to help push over this tree to put out a fire that was created by Universal Dynamics when they were trying to recover Roz. This is a really special movie, and it seems like it's done okay in between segments. I did look up, it had a 35 million domestic opening. I'm really curious to see what the international market's going to be like, but I suspect word of mouth is going to push this into being a critical Marvel box office wise. So fingers crossed that it is. If you saw it, please let me know. You can comment on the episode or let me know on social media. Now let's jump into my review of Super / The Man, the Christopher Reeve Story.
What you probably don't know is that I left New York last September, and I just arrived here this morning.
Super / The Man is a documentary about Christopher Reeve, his life story, as well as his pivot to advocacy for disability rights after his accident in 95. And it's a special documentary. I think this would have been really easy to have the story be all about the amazing character to which Christopher Reeve had. And it is that, but as well as discussing the incredible accomplishments he had as an advocate for disability rights, the film tells a fully rounded story of Christopher's life, becoming Superman, as well as what it meant to pop culture and fans around the world to have Superman no longer able to move outside of his head because of the accident and the tragedy to which that was. His family, all three of his children, are participants in the documentary, and it's incredibly emotionally moving to see their lives presented on the screen. They're all a part of it, and they all provide their interesting perspectives on their life with having Christopher Reeve as a father, coming from, ironically, this was completely unplanned, but blended families, and not being afraid to discuss the changes that happened to their father after the accident. The eldest son discusses the fact that he thought his dad was a better father after the accident because his perspective was shaped by his own relationship with his father, F.D. Reeve. And I found that really interesting because it's the cycle to which you learn to be a parent. A lot of the positives and negatives come from your own upbringing and then making those conscious choices to whether to be a parent like your own. I adore Christopher Reeve. He's Superman to me. There have been other great Supermen. I also really loved Henry Cavill. Growing up in the 1990s, specifically with the DC animated universe, that version, Tim Daly's version, really did feel akin to the Christopher Reeve version of Superman. And that character has been so hard to recapture. And you see why with what Christopher Reeve brought to the character. On top of that, the man as a person was much more interesting because of his upbringing, his broken home that he had come from, and the world to which he lived in with having children with two different women and the obstacles that provided. And on top of that, after his accident, and how that dramatically affected his relationships with his wife, with his kids, And something that I was unaware of was that shortly after his passing in 2003, Christopher Reeve's wife passed away as well, leaving Will Reeve, their son, with no parents and eventually being raised by the other half of his family. And what that did and how that affected his upbringing as a whole. This documentary is really heart-wrenching and it punches you in the gut more than once. But more than anything, what I really appreciated, and I probably said this already, but it's an emotional experience to see somebody known for being Ubermesh, the Superman, being brought down to the incapability of movement. And I remember vividly when I just did that. When Christopher Reeve came to Smallville and was a character who let Tom Welling, a new generation's version of Clark Kent, know that he was Kal-El of Krypton. And what a special moment that was as a fan of that character, to have the Superman metaphorically, and there's no literal torch, of course, but hand the torch to Tom Welling, who is probably still Superman to a generation, meant a lot. And that Christopher Reeve didn't have being confined to a wheelchair define him. He used that as an opportunity, knowing about his fame. And you'll hear the clip where he was at the Oscars leading into this review, that he knew he had to be the voice for people who had often been ignored, and redefining for himself, you can see this in the trailers, what it means to be a hero. And I'll forever look at Christopher Reeve that way. It's hard not to without thinking of Superman. It's the poster that's behind me as I record this. But having two pieces of media this week be about parental relationships and the dynamics and challenges that all of that entails and how it dramatically affects your life in more ways than one is, it was an emotional week for me, to say the least. And this gets wide release on October 11th. If you are a fan of Superman or DC Comics in general, or just want to get a more in-depth analysis of Christopher Reeve, I think it's a must watch. I'm not sure if it's getting theatrical wide release, I did see it early, or if it's going to be something that releases on Crave around the time, but it's definitely worth watching, even as a film fan, to get a new perspective on the production history behind those 4 Superman films from the Salkinds. Richard Donner, who has unfortunately passed away as well, is in this, and it talks about the really interesting relationships that Christopher Reeve had. One being his roommate was Robin Williams at Juilliard. We get Glenn Close, Susan Sarandon, and we get a more in-depth look at his relationships with Hollywood, which certainly has its challenges as well. I highly recommend checking out it's just Superman, but Super/The Man, the Christopher Reeve story, husband, father, fighter, and hero. It is absolutely worth checking out, and I'm still emotional while talking about it, so I think that does a lot more than what I've probably said in my review. So let's jump into question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question?
Just one?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
This week's question of the week was asking you to rank the Transformers films. I know that was a big ask to have seen all 7, if not 9, including the animated films, so we got a bag of mixed responses, which was to be expected. Greetings, Kyle. I have admittedly never seen any Transformers media, but I learned a lot from this week's episode. I had no idea the franchise started as a comic or that its origins stretched back to the 80s. Very keen. I enjoyed hearing from Ben and appreciated his contributions to the discussion. All in all, I don't know if this universe is really for me, but I am happy I learned more about it from people who sound like experts in their field. Oh, sorry. I was just supposed to answer the question of the week. What was it again? Rank all the Transformers movies? Well, I wouldn't have a clue, so pass. Here's hoping the Penguin series is successful. Keep it keen, Keen Machine. Thank you, Keen. You know what? I'm really glad you said what you said in this question of the week answer response. And I should state, because I don't think I have actually, you don't have to answer question of the week. I'm more than happy if you have questions for me, or if there's things you would like me to rank or tier list or any of that, please feel free to send them in. I love talking to the listeners. It's one of my favorite parts of this show is, for one, I'd like to hear your reactions to my reactions to this media. So please do that. don't ever feel, oh, I didn't see that, or I can't answer the question of the week. Please submit your answers, because I'd love to see them, regardless of if they have to do with the question of the week. Scotty Cameron did write in. Let's start at the bottom. 8, Revenge of the Fallen. 7, Transformers The Last Night. 5, Transformers. Interesting. Okay. 4, Dark of the Moon. Huge gap. 3, Transformers Rise of the Beasts. 2, Transformers the Movie. And number 1, Bumblebee. And then there's a little bit of a comment. I know the 1986 is a cult classic. However, I gave Bumblebee the top spot because it is a better paced movie. Dark of the Moon goes above 2007 for having actual stakes. The Last Night is above Revenge of the Fallen because it's more entertaining. Revenge of the Fallen is bottom because of skids and mudflap. That's fair. Okay. And then Dylan wrote in, Transformers means nothing to me. So here's a question for you. What's a major franchise you just never connected with? For me, it's probably Fast and Furious, which I don't get the hype for. That's a really great question, Dylan, and it does connect to what Keen's email is. This is going to upset a lot of people, but even though I know they're great movies, I've seen them maybe a couple of times, I've never been a passionate fan of Lord of the Rings. I've seen all 6 of the movies. I've never watched the extended cuts. I want to love this franchise, and because of that, I've never cared to watch Rings of Power. I've not watched a second of it. It's something I know a lot of people love, but with Rings of Power specifically, it doesn't have the massive audience that I think Amazon was expecting. So that's probably, for me, my answer. I would have to go with the Lord of the Rings universe. Thank you so much for answering. And again, you can ask me questions. I'd love to hear from you. If you would like to answer the question of the week or ask a question, you can email the podcast, filmreelistpod@gmail.com, or you can comment on all the social medias. The link tree is listed within the episode. Next week's episode is going to be a review of Joker Folie à Deux, the second, I'm assuming probably last, Joker film starring Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, of course. So really curious about that. Maybe it is a musical, maybe it's not. This week's question of the week is a personal question. What is a movie that always makes you emotional and or cry? I'm really curious what film has been able to pull that emotional reaction from you. So as always, you can comment on the social media post for question of the week when it goes live, or you can email the podcast anytime. I'm asking the listeners, if you're returning or new, please follow the podcast on your platform. It helps get the podcast out there. If your podcast platform allows for this, please leave a review or a rating. It helps spread the show's listener base substantially, which would be amazing. Thank you so much. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I hope to see you next time.